Hey, today I'll be talking about Book 5 of Legend of ZhenHuan. We left off with ZhenHuan finding out about Xuanqing's death. It seems someone's tampered with his boat, and ZhenHuan decides she needs to go back to the palace to investigate and also save her brother who has lost his mind and is wasting away in the far-off borderlands. There's the whole Jinxi and Li Chang thing. Li Chang agrees to help ZhenHuan meet with the emperor comes, she does her whole thing of, "Oh wow, is this a dream?" This part was pretty unpleasant to read, not because of the writing, but just hearing so many of ZhenHuan's thoughts at having to pretend to care about this man she hates and play the sad, pining woman when she wants nothing more than to be as far away from him as possible. Just, ugh. When they sleep together, she is disgusted and almost vomits. All she can think about is Xuanqing and how this place used to be theirs, while the emperor, seeing what he wants to, doesn't notice at all and thinks they're both in the throes of passion. It's nauseating. They wake up and she's got her act all planned out. She knows just what he needs to hear, and he just drinks it right up. He mentions Fu, the girl we know was killed recently for supposedly poisoning him, but pretending at ignorance, ZhenHuan asks who she is. Xuanling kissed my forehead and chuckled. It doesn't matter. It's in the past. She's here no longer. I didn't speak. A woman he had doted on for a year, who had become the target of public criticism because of his excessive affection, was wiped away by him with such light words. How sad. At one point, ZhenHuan considers grabbing her scissors from the dresser and just killing him, but she needs him to help her family. He starts visiting her regularly, and her brother is moved into the capital for treatment. Meanwhile, back at the palace, a woman named Xu is also found to be pregnant and promoted to Xu Jieyu. She's very, very similar to Shu from Rui's royal palace, completely dedicated and sincere, but the emperor takes that for granted. When he was sick, she knelt and prayed for him day and night, but because the empress didn't report it until much later, the emperor really didn't take much notice. Astrologers have said that her fate clashes with the Empress Dowager's, so she's been grounded in her palace until further notice. A departure from the drama, where this astrological sign was used as an excuse to keep ZhenHuan from returning to the palace. Dr. Wen is put in charge of ZhenHuan's pregnancy and is really upset when he finds out that she's going back to the palace. I just want to say, I feel like I didn't give him enough credit in the drama. He is a really good guy. Yes, ZhenHuan has no interest in him and he has proposed one too many times, but when you think about it, he's been a perfect friend. All he's really done is be by her side and support her no matter how much he disagrees with her decisions or how much danger it puts him in. He doesn't want her to go back to the scheming of the palace, but seeing that that's her decision, all he says is, "What can I do to keep you safe?" The emperor finds out he's over the moon and he decides to bring her back as a consort. ZhenHuan meets with Xuanqing's mother and the conversation is pretty much the same. Feng Ruo comes and gives us a state of the harem address. I'll break it down for you. She says the most favored concubine is currently Imperial Noble Concubine Chang, who has just given birth to the 4th princess. Remember, she will not be able to have any more children thanks to the empress. Feng Ruo speculates that were it not for ZhenHuan returning, she would definitely have been the next one promoted to consort. Lingrong is also an Imperial Noble Concubine. Not as well favored, but she's had a very stable standing over the last few years. She has her own palace and helps the empress run things in the harem. There are also 2 other Imperial Noble Concubines, Hui and Xin. Hui is Mei Zhuang and Xin is the first princess's mother. Just to recap on the children, we've got the first princess, the second princess is Wan Yi, Tao's daughter, and the third princess is ZhenHuan's Long Yue. There's still just the one prince who should be 12 or 13 at this point because ZhenHuan has been gone for 4 years. With ZhenHuan returning, the emperor has decided on a few promotions. Chang will be promoted to Zhao Yi. She's renamed and becomes Hu Zhao Yi. Xin will be promoted to Zhao Rong and is renamed Lü, so Lü Zhao Rong. I can handle the rank changes, but the random name changes are killing me. Continuing down the list, Qi, who was a Jieyu, will be promoted to Imperial Noble Concubine. No promotions for the pregnant Xu Jieyu as she's under lockdown. Then there's Yang Fengyi, a semi-important character that will play a role later, so here she is. And finally, there's Yan Changzai. This is Lan Yi, an uncouth animal trainer who no one gets along with. And to be clear, this is nowhere near all the names in the harem, just the only ones that are worth talking about for now. As ZhenHuan prepares to return to the palace, she meets with Mo Yan. She's worried at first that Mo Yan will be disappointed with her for going back to the man who betrayed her trust, but Mo Yan is very understanding. She does ask ZhenHuan for a favor. Her daughter is now old enough that she would be allowed to join her in the temple, but her application was rejected. The reason why is that she was assaulted while working alone on the riverboat. The ever-friendly nuns consider her impure now and so unworthy to join their ranks. And honestly, I had to take a break then and there because f*** those evil nuns and this backwards-ass thinking. Mo Yan blames herself for leaving her daughter working alone at such a young age and begs ZhenHuan to take her to the palace as a maid and help her make a life for herself. ZhenHuan asks An Yu if she's willing to go. An Yu's expression was as panicked as a wounded animal. "I just want to go to a place without men." I hugged An Yu and said softly, "Don't be afraid. There's only one man in the palace. The palace is the place with the fewest men in the world. It's just that life in the palace is very hard. Does that frighten you?" An Yu's voice was low and firm. "I'm not afraid." She's renamed Huayi, and ZhenHuan promises Mo Yan she will take care of her. With that, ZhenHuan is officially reinstated with the title of consort. Head down, receiving her new title, is how she is reunited with Xuanqing, who made it back to the palace and was shortly after dispatched by the emperor to go and pick her up. They make eye contact, but before ZhenHuan can say anything, Huanbi rushes out and hugs him. Which is actually lucky because Li Chang is right there, and without Huanbi's distraction would probably have noticed how devastated these two look to be reuniting like this. Li Chang leaves, and then it's all the same with her saying he should forget about her. They meet by the water, it's too late, one last hug, she doesn't tell him that the baby is his. She leaves Mo Yan in charge of the temple, she's seen to the palace, she greets the emperor and the empress. Her story is that she was praying for the country this whole time. The empress and Lingrong pretend to be happy she's back with her lavish homecoming. She meets Hu Zhaoyi for the first time and knows that she is extremely rude and unwieldy, but the empress doesn't bother much to discipline her. She treats her pretty much the same way she treated Hua Fei. Part of this is that Hu is the emperor's cousin and so comes from a very noble family. She's clearly pampered and spoiled by the emperor's favor, and she doesn't like ZhenHuan as she feels she came out of nowhere and stole the consort position right out from under her. The now 36-year-old empress has been keeping a tight grip on things. Though 25 new concubines were married in during ZhenHuan's absence, 10 are dead or disabled from palace scheming. And other than Hu, there have been no other successful pregnancies. ZhenHuan meets Lan Yi and finds her standoffishness kind of refreshing. Huayi settles in and makes the perfect palace maid. She's cheerful and nice, but not naive to how evil people can be. Meizhuang and ZhenHuan could not be happier to reunite. Longyue is less happy to see her. ZhenHuan meets with the Empress Dowager. As ZhenHuan gets to know Hu better, she finds her kind of amusing, very pretty, but not a real threat. We find out Hu's background story. When she was born, no one could get her fists to open. It wasn't until a chance meeting with the emperor at a banquet one day that they opened for the first time to reveal a small red piece of beautifully formed jade. The emperor was so delighted that he welcomed her into the harem on the spot, making her one of the few women not chosen at a concubine selection. Hu constantly keeps this jade on her. Meizhuang rightfully says this story is complete bullshit, which it is, but ZhenHuan knows nothing matters but what the emperor says is true. He likes the story, he likes her, and that's all there is to it. She plans to keep an eye on Hu. If she went this far to cook up a story to get the emperor's attention, she must have big plans. Qi and her roommate Qing come to visit. Qi says it's been a while, and ZhenHuan, not beating around the bush, says, "Yes, we were so harmonious when we lived together in Tangli Palace. It must have been 4 or 5 years ago. Back then, your brother Guanlu was on good terms with my brother, and Guanxi almost married my sister Yu Yao. We nearly became one family. Who could have imagined that Guanlu would end up informing against my brother? Goes to show, some people can ignore morality and justice for the sake of fame and fortune." Qi admits no fault, saying the truth is what it is, and storms off. ZhenHuan visits Duan, who still completely adores Wen Yi, and advises her to think twice before trying to take Longyue away from Jing. Lingrong is still publicly acting like her friend, and during conversation one day, ZhenHuan recognizes the smell of musk about her. She can't figure out if Lingrong is using it herself or trying to get ZhenHuan to miscarry by hanging around her. ZhenHuan is allowed to see her brother, who has totally lost his mind. He's being kept in pretty much a cage, though the doctors say that is for his own safety. The floor was completely covered with straw, which it seemed had not been changed since the rainy season. There was a damp smell, and a few small black insects crawled through the straw. The room only held a small round table and a wooden bed. On the table was some food, and half a bowl of unfinished medicine. My brother was sitting on the wooden bed, staring blankly at the only window, which sat open in the roof. ZhenHuan is devastated to see the state he's in. He won't talk, but he doesn't resist as she washes his matted hair, and Huanbi forces the doctor that's been caring for him to drink the dirty water that washes off until he vomits. The attendants mention that a Miss Gu has been his only visitor, but when ZhenHuan asks who that is, they have no idea. Finally, her brother speaks for the first time when his eyes fall on a peach blossom embroidery on her dress, and he murmurs Qian Tao, his wife's name. I said softly, "Brother, sister-in-law is no longer with us, but you have to tell me what I can do to help you. Brother!" He held my cloak tightly, his expression as gentle as a baby's. After a moment, in a low voice, he whispered, "Jia Yi." Had I not been so close, I almost wouldn't have heard it. I suddenly understood. Just as I was about to speak, Li Chang entered and urged, "Your Highness, it's getting late. We should be returning to the palace." ZhenHuan has to leave, but now knows who this mysterious Miss Gu is. It was only mentioned once in the book when she saw her a few months ago, but it's pretty wild to me that she didn't remember her name. I would have had that name tattooed on my arm memento style until I could get my revenge. ZhenHuan becomes curious about Xu Jieyu, who is now 5 months pregnant and still imprisoned because of the astrology thing. ZhenHuan goes to visit her and finds she is not being treated very well. The emperor obviously cares little for her, and though she is pregnant, she's only receiving the bare necessities. From their conversation, ZhenHuan can see clearly that she is one of the sincere ones, truly in love with the emperor, or at least her idea of him. She sees a bit of her young self in her. On her way out, she says to Huan Bi, "The child in her belly has a different meaning to her. It's neither a means to compete for favor nor a tool for advancement. It's the flesh and blood connection between herself and the man she loves." She begins encouraging the emperor to go and see Xu more, and he agrees, though he finds her very boring. ZhenHuan and Lingrong, again still publicly maintaining their friendship, go and visit Xu Jieyu, who has been feeling a bit unwell. They see her roommate scratching herself a lot. A doctor is called in and pinpoints the problem as an allergy to musk. Duan, Jing, the emperor, and the empress are called over. Finally, they find the musk in Lingrong's sachet, as ZhenHuan knew they would since she noticed that smell earlier. The emperor immediately jumps to anger, throwing the sachet in Lingrong's face and shouting, demanding to know what her intentions were with this. Xuanling grew angrier. "I've always seen you as gentle and well-behaved. Over the years, I've treated you very well, even more so than the concubines from noble families, but you still dare to commit such an outrageous act? What do you have to say for yourself?" Xuanling's chest rose and fell unsteadily. No one had imagined it would be her. They all exchanged shocked glances, bowing over and over. I laughed secretly to myself before hurrying over to Xuanling's side, stroking his chest and saying softly, "Your Majesty, please don't be too angry. What if your anger hurts your precious body?" Lingrong won't say anything to defend herself and cries so hard that she passes out. ZhenHuan is suspicious that Lingrong won't say a word in her defense, but before she can figure it out, Lingrong's maid runs up and falls at the emperor's feet saying, "Your Majesty, please, Mistress An wears this every day, but she didn't make it herself." The maid says it was gifted to her by young Fang Yi 2 years ago, and that she's been wearing it ever since. She insists that Lingrong could not have known about the musk, or she wouldn't have been wearing it all this time. Concubine Duan took a step back and glanced at me calmly, hinting at me not to let my expression show. I was shocked. This had taken a turn I had not expected. Yang is called in. She clearly has no idea what's going on. We haven't really talked to her much, but from what we can gather, she's just, a normal woman. She says she did make the sachet for Lingrong, but like the maid said, it was years ago. At that moment, Dr. Wei Lin's needle brought Lingrong back, and she came to slowly with a soft, "Ayo." Her eyes filled with tears and she called out softly, "Your Highness." Xuanling strode forward to help her up, looking a bit ashamed. "Ronger, are you feeling better?" At these words, Concubine Duan and I shared a glance. We both knew that all our efforts today had been in vain, and we couldn't help but feel secretly angry. In a last-ditch effort, Duan says that though Yang made the sachet, in 2 years, Lingrong could have taken it out and put in anything she wanted. But her maid is steadfast as she has watched her mistress wear this every day, and she has never even opened it. The emperor doesn't want to hear anymore and decides to imprison Yang, who again, literally has no idea what's going on. Suppressing the emotions in my heart, I said softly, "It was Xu Jieyu who was frightened today. Will your highness not see her and give her some comfort?" Xuanling hesitated for a moment, looked at the frail Lingrong in his arms, and then said, "I will accompany Rongor back first, and then come back and see Xu Jieyu later. Have the imperial doctor take care of her first." As he leaves, Xu peeks from behind the door, and ZhenHuan can see that she is devastated to see how little she means to him. Her sorrow was so deep that it left me at a loss for any words that would be of comfort. It felt like it had been such a long time. I also used to cry and feel hurt because of Xuanling's words and deeds. They would cut me to my bone. But that was an eternity ago. The Xu Jieyu in front of me was just like me that year, completely sincere and ruled by her emotions. I motioned to Juru to take out a cloak, put it on Xu Jieyu myself, and said softly, "Sister, go inside. It's not worth hurting your body over." Xu Jieyu caressed her belly with slow and soft movements and said in a low voice, "Yes, all I have is this child." Before she could finish speaking, she staggered back and fainted. The next morning, Xu Jieyu is still unconscious and news comes out that Yang committed suicide. Despite promising he would be back, the emperor keeps ignoring requests to pay Xu a visit, so Meizhuang and ZhenHuan go and ask the empress dowager for help. Meizhuang says they have tried to send messages to the emperor, but there has been no response, and the empress dowager is really disappointed with both Lingrong and her son. They go to Xu's palace together, and by this time, the emperor has finally shown up. The emperor has embarrassed himself with this little show of infatuation, and the empress dowager is not letting him get away with it. She asks him what he was so busy with that he couldn't be bothered to check in on his future child. Xuanling hesitated for a moment and then said with a smile, "Imperial noble concubine An suffered a fright today. I was visiting with her for a bit and didn't realize Xu Jieyu was in such poor health." The empress dowager was still smiling, but there was a hint of coldness to her smile. She said, The palace maids are becoming more and more skilled in their duties. Such a thing happened and they didn't think to report immediately to the emperor? One of the maids who served Xu Jieyu had accompanied Liu Dieyi to greet him outside the palace. Hearing what the Empress Dowager said, she hurriedly responded, "We servants ran to Jingxun Palace several times but could not meet with the emperor. Even eunuch Li could not get in touch with him." The Empress Dowager sneered with a hint of sternness. "Seems what I heard was indeed true. But was it the people at Jingxun Palace who purposely hid this from the emperor? Or was the emperor informed and coldly ignored the affairs of Yuzhao Palace?" Of course, the emperor could not be in the wrong, which means the ones in the wrong must have been those workers. Go and pass on my order. Everyone in Jingxun Palace will be fined a year's salary. These small mistakes need to be punished to avoid bigger mistakes in the future. The emperor stammers out a few more excuses and the Empress Dowager relents, hopefully having embarrassed him enough that he doesn't try this nonsense again. I love this version of her. Drama Empress Dowager was a sack of potatoes for all the personality she had. In the end, Xu makes it through okay and does not end up losing her baby. ZhenHuan was at least able to salvage something from this failed plot as the Empress Dowager now really does not like Lingrong. Xu begins to recover and ZhenHuan convinces the emperor to release her from house arrest. She also bribes an astrologer to flip things, making it so that Lingrong is the unlucky one who needs to be kept away from others. Once the emperor stops seeing her, he is surprised to find how quickly he gets over her, which must be a hint about Lingrong using that addictive incense to make him never want to leave her palace. Meizhuang does her bracelet thing and gets pregnant. Of course, we don't see any of this. ZhenHuan just hears what happened, and when she talks to Meizhuang about it, all Meizhuang says is that it's time to move forward with her life. One of Xu's maids, Chishao, bears a resemblance to the late great Hua Fei and catches the emperor's eye. He starts openly flirting with the maid to the embarrassment of everyone, especially Xu. Jing notices Li Chang's handkerchief and betrays ZhenHuan to the empress. Jinxi and Li Chang are imprisoned. ZhenHuan asks Xu to do her a favor and asks the emperor to release them. What Xu says is the same thoughtful speech about finding love where you can get it that Duan gives in episode 59. Xu was of course not in the drama, but they picked just the right person for this plot point. Dawn was the perfect person to give this speech considering the way she's been living all these years, and the speech matches her thoughtful, caring personality to a T. Again, the scriptwriters did an amazing job with this adaptation. Jinxi and Li Chang are released, and we have the exact same scene in front of the Empress's palace with Jinxi's badass return. Then a banquet where ZhenHuan sees Xuanqing for the first time since her return to the palace. He's been sick and has lost a lot of weight. They do the courteous greeting and then meet outside. They have that private conversation. Xuanqing mentions that he knows Lan Yi, and they're overheard by someone. When they return to the banquet, the emperor is a little tipsy and the empress pushes him to take in Xu's maid Chishao, saying she can tell he's taken a liking to her. He'd planned on waiting until Xu delivered and coughs, deliberately trying to signal to the empress to let it go, but it's subtle enough that the empress can pretend she didn't hear it. The empress says it's her responsibility to see to the emperor's desires, and she would be remiss in her duties if she ignored the obvious chemistry between this maid and the emperor. In front of everyone, she asked Xu Jieyu if she wouldn't mind parting with her maid. Xu Jieyu's face turned white and then red. She stood up, lowered her head, and said, "It is your highness's decision." The empress put down her chopsticks and said with a smile, "These words seem a bit reluctant. Your maid needs your explicit permission to leave. I wouldn't dare so casually make the decision for you." Xuanling hurriedly smiled and said, "Yan Yi is sensible. I haven't mentioned this yet because I was afraid she would be upset and hurt the fetus. I thought it best to wait for a while." Xuanling had barely finished speaking and Chishao had already gone red. Her body was clenched tight in indignation. She was almost about to cry. The queen said pleasantly, "As an emperor's concubine, such things happen. It's certainly no big matter." Everyone's eyes fell on Xu Jieyu like swords. She pursed her lips tightly and with a pale face said, "Yes, I also think it's a good idea. Thank you, your highness, for your care towards Chishao." Xuanling breathed a sigh of relief and said with a smile, "Go and get my red sandalwood ri as a reward." Xu is clearly hurt and leaves early. ZhenHuan, worried, follows after her. By the time she arrives, Xu has collapsed in pain but refuses to let anyone call a doctor. As ZhenHuan is trying to get her to see reason, Xu tells her that she's always been curious about her, the girl who had the emperor's heart. She's always known that the emperor doesn't care for her, but she thought that she might find a place in his heart one day. She says ZhenHuan is so lucky that the emperor was always thinking of her even when she was away, and she realizes bitterly that the only reason he paid her any attention is because she bears a slight resemblance to ZhenHuan. Of course, she doesn't realize that ZhenHuan is in the exact same situation really. They're all just shadows of the person really in his heart, the previous empress. Xu goes into labor. A doctor has to be called in at this point, and it seems things aren't looking good. The emperor and the empress arrive to the news that the baby is coming out the wrong way and they might not be able to save it. Xuanling is blaming himself for not being more patient and marrying her maid, and the Empress takes the opportunity to scheme against Xu by making her look bad, saying, "Listening to Xu Jieyu's suffering, I feel very uneasy. If she could think more openly, if she could be as generous and virtuous as Consort 1, she wouldn't be like this." She really does not take a day off. It'll be a while, so ZhenHuan is sent home, and on her way, she's attacked by cats and goes into labor. It's a back and forth as ZhenHuan continues sending her maids to get news of Xu, even while she is in the middle of delivery. Xu is still in labor when ZhenHuan finally passes out from exhaustion. She wakes up to find out that she had twins, a boy and a girl, the second prince Yuhan and the fifth princess Lingxi. The emperor decides to promote ZhenHuan to Shufei. While the emperor gushes on and on about how happy he is, she thinks of the twins' real father, Xuanqing. Just then, we get the news that Xu did manage to give birth, and the messenger was late, but she actually gave birth first. So her son Yu Pei is actually the second prince, and ZhenHuan's son is the third prince. Xu's son is not very healthy and will need to be watched carefully. ZhenHuan has to practically force the emperor to go and visit Xu. As she lies in bed, like the pivotal moment in a detective drama, a bunch of clues flash through her mind. Lan Yi always wearing green, her obsession with those flowers, the fact that she's an animal trainer. Okay, that last one kind of gave it away. Anyway, she puts together that Lan Yi must have tried to hurt her with those wild animals because she's in love with Xuanqing. The emperor comes back from visiting Xu. I know giving Chishao a title hurt her heart. He seemed to feel a bit guilty. I was a bit reckless in my excitement that day. In addition to making her an imperial noble concubine, I will also choose a special title for her. There was a moment of silence. I meant to comfort him, but he was already relieved, as if he had comforted himself. However, the empress was right. Yan Yi's mind is indeed a bit small. She doesn't possess the magnanimity a concubine should have. I was stunned. His guilt towards her was nothing more than this, more fleeting even than a cloud in the sky. Ling Rong gets very sick and will never sing again. ZhenHuan finally confronts Jing, and it's the same as the drama. She decides to leave Long Yue in her care. Xu gets promoted and renamed to Zhen, so she becomes Zhen Guipian. Weeks later, they do their official promotion ceremony. They do their bows to the emperor and the empress, and the emperor tells the empress to step back a bit and let ZhenHuan take over the day-to-day harem affairs. In a faraway palace, I knew Mei Zhuang was raising a glass to me with a smile on her face. Consort Jing, Consort Duan, and Lu Jiarong were all my allies. Hu Zhaoyi was favored, but sterile. An Lingrong had long since fallen out of favor. She hadn't even been allowed to attend the promotion ceremony. Imperial concubines Xiang and Xi were nothing to be afraid of. As for noble Lady Yan, that woman with expressions as cold as frost and snow, I sighed softly in my heart. Covering up with my sleeve, I drank deeply from my cup. From now on, the harem would no longer be ruled by just one person. We stood evenly matched like opposing horns in a standoff. No one could say who would emerge victorious. A silent smile appeared on the corner of my lips. The end. I mean, not really. There are 2 more books. Till next time. Thanks for watching.